debut solo album. And that is what a classic is defined by, because decades later, it still rings melodious. Welcome back. It's Hard Facts, 92.3 Nigeria Info. Those who know me call me Sam Orakuchinedu, and if you don't know me, you're very much welcome to use that same name. 13 minutes past 4 p.m. on this truly terrific Tuesday. Our conversation for this hour is on institutional reforms. We're talking the Constitution, we're talking the Electoral Act, and the judiciary. So it is holistic. Well, the Senate has promised Nigerians key reforms in the second half of the 10th National Assembly, including, and this is the big one, because Nigerians have been complaining, a review of the 1999 Constitution and the electoral system. Senate leader Okoyemi Bamidele emphasized that the electoral reforms will focus on ensuring that every vote counts to boost democratic participation and transparency. Bamidele noted that credible elections would encourage more citizens to engage in the process. Additionally, the Senate aims to implement major judicial reforms to improve justice delivery, and these include proposed bills on the appointment, tenure, and welfare of judges and judicial officers. So, for context, they're looking to review the 1999 Constitution, targeting outdated provisions and pushing for a more citizen-responsive structure. Looking to overhaul the Electoral Act with a focus on ensuring that votes count. Judicial reforms, including bills on appointment, tenure, welfare of judges, aimed at improving the delivery of justice. And of course, they emphasize on credible elections as a catalyst for increased civic engagement. Now, looking at this, the Senate has a lot on its plate. But usually, my nature is to ask questions. If these problems existed already, why were we comfortable with the existing system? My guest is a legal practitioner. He's Chief Festus Oguche, and a public affairs analyst, and he joins me because who better to talk judiciary than Chief Oguche himself. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so this question will not be easy to answer in one sentence. I literally doubt that, you can encapsulate it and it rings as much as it would need to. But if I were to just ask, what needs to happen for a country to need electoral, judicial, and constitutional reforms? What state should they be in for them to start asking for those kinds of reforms?
It is simply that our democracy was just a means to get rid of the military and the barracks at the time it formed in 1999.
Okay.
The problem that time was to ensure that the democracy is entrenched as a system of government, and it also reflects our level of desperation to have the system rooted in our system. But we didn't quite take a look at some of these things and the implications of some of the actions that were taken. So a lot of them were wishy-washy. But we have now come to grasp with the reality, which tells us that there are so many gaps and inadequacies in the system that we are operating. A lot of these gaps were created just by us, some by the political elites, and some also by the circumstance of our national existence. But looking at it holistically, I think it's not just institutional reforms that's necessary this time. I think it's also legal reforms, because we are grasping with a whole lot of errors in the system. So much, starting from the presidency down to the lowest thing you can think about. And at least we have now been very sure to some end that democracy is not the answer to all the questions.
Yeah.
And that maybe there are other alternatives we could explore, even if it's within the tenets of democracy. But simply that we take things for granted, and the country is beginning to derail from the expectations that made of it some 2-3 decades ago, and a lot of disappointments and misgivings are beginning to crop up that will require that we position a lot of these institutions, vital institutions, democratic institutions, towards the end of achieving the goals of having a wholesome system that will meet the ends of time.
What were the conditions that led to the drafting of the 1999 Constitution? How quickly was it done? Where did we pull inspiration from?
Well, essentially, the inspiration was drawn from the United States Constitution. But where we got it wrong initially was the manner we discarded the Westminster type of government, which I think is a lot better and much more attuned to the process than having this presidential executive system that enthrones principalities and powers into office. People who think they have the wherewithals to do anything as they like.
Chief Oguche, are you saying that we would have been better off with a prime minister than a president?
A lot better. Look at the institutional correctional facilities, collective responsibility. The prime minister is a member of parliament, legislative responsibility. And those are a lot better, much better in terms that will attune to our multifarious system, that will have a wholly executive presidential system with the kind of federalism we are practicing. The whole thing centers around Abuja. And you begin to question why do we then have component units? People say, what do they call fiscal federalism, fiscal this. How do you attune it to the system we are practicing? How will that apply? Except maybe this overhauling that they are talking about, which I think is only some half-hearted measures in ensuring that maybe you have a working system. But it doesn't solve any problem at the end of the day. If you look at it from the practical point of view, you'll discover that so many things are wrong with the system we operate in now, not just in terms of the federal system that it proclaims, but also in terms of the Constitution. And these series of amendments may not necessarily solve the problem. So the action at 1999 in entrenching democracy was essentially meant as a starter for a model for better reforms at the end. And one had expected that between that period and now, there should have been a new constitution that's grounded in legitimacy, grounded in sovereignty, grounded in people power.
Well, we've had amendments along the way.
So many of them.
Yeah, so I guess that's how it works. Do we completely replace the document or amend it to perfection?
You can take it through millions of amendments. If it's an unworkable document, it remains unworkable. And it's a sort of a constitution that is very lopsided, imposed by the military. And now the errors are staring us at the face. Those of us that were making case for a new constitution that time, for the convocation of a sovereign national conference, a people's conference that people should gather and discuss their future, discuss their existence, which is what the constitution should be, which is what democracy should address. We are now beginning to be vindicated to the extent that you see that this system has collapsed, is at the stage of near collapse. We have to tell ourselves the truth. No matter how we bandy about the fact that this is a democratic country, we are practicing democracy, we've not gotten there. We are not even halfway through to that journey.
Well, in the defense of government, we've had a few conferences here and there. The most notable, of course, the one in 2014. But
then you ask yourself, why has that conference not been implemented?
Yeah, the white paper is still somewhere. It's still somewhere. So hopefully they can find out where it is and bring it out. But of course, what Chief Oguche was speaking to was before 1979, we're using the UK parliamentary system. And after that, we adopted the American one. Now, my question is, do we have to model our constitution after another system? Because we went from British to American.
No, it doesn't have to go that way. Democracy is very fluid, and you can adjust it to suit any circumstance.
Okay.
So also is the Constitution. But then, if you recall, we were just a few years after independence, and we went through a very brutal civil war that almost devastated the country. And we had nothing to do than to, align ourselves with the British model as at that time, which worked, except maybe for some intrigues here and there, and some mischiefs by the political elite. Say mischiefs that have not been taken care of. We still see them happening all over the place. But then, if you look at it theoretically, you discover that most constitutions are framed in line with the indices on the ground, with the fact, with the nitty-gritty of the situation on the ground, in terms of the people, in terms of the alignment of the population, the demography, in terms of the expectations of the population, in terms of their will and aspiration. These are very important elements. But then, since then, I hardly can say that there has been any election that has reflected the will of the people of this country. And that is where we got it wrong, because the electoral process is very, very important in entrenching constitutional and democratic norms. That if the people express themselves and that expression is not represented at the end of the day in who represents them or who leads them, it will have very retributive impact on the quality of governance.
Well, lovers, haters, and everyone on different sides have claimed that the 93 election was the best Nigeria has produced. Of course, that was before 99. So we obviously were not using the 99 constitution at the time. So if people have agreed that the June 12 election 93 was free, fair, credible, and these are people from different sides, that means that Nigeria is capable of conducting credible elections, right? That is a fact. What did we do then that we are not doing now?
First of all, I want to say that while we are not trying to impugn the political character of our people, we'll say that we have a way of doing things.
Okay.
I talked about desperation earlier. It is roundly acknowledged that that election was free to the extent that you can ascribe transparency to any electoral process. But it did see the light of day.
Yeah.
It is still the problem that we are talking about now that truncated that process. So it's like a vicious cycle that we can only thrive in fraudulent elections, that once elections are seen to be free, fair, credible, there will be a supervening factor that will truncate it somewhere. That's the crux of the matter. And we have to point it out to ourselves that since then, since that election, there hasn't been any process, and I want anybody to tell me otherwise, that you can say is free, fair, and credible. That at the end of the day, we have a system that enthrones the wrong people into the forefront of political issues.
Well, the crux of the matter...
People who should be in obscurity are brought into limelight politically. Because, I mean, there's something we call the elections, and there's something we call the judiciary that will always make declarations in favor of people who lose elections.
Well,
so how would we expect society to thrive in that circumstance? That's a problem.
I'm not defending the system, but politics by design is political. And to a certain extent, what that means is a lot of due process is truncated. So
I disagree with you totally.
That if is you go into my modern day definition of politics. We'll take a break, and after that, we talk some more. Please
that's
stay
a
with
definition
us.
From the Nigerian context.
in 92.3 Nigeria Info, Sam Oracle Chinedu here. A review of the 99 Constitution, an overhaul of the Electoral Act and judicial reforms. These are the promises made by the Senate, and they state that this will happen in the second half of the 10th Assembly. My guest is Chief Festus Oguche. He is a legal practitioner and a public affairs analyst. You're welcome once again, sir.
Thank you very much.
And we're speaking to the nature of these reforms. What would they mean for us? So let's start, even though we have started already, with the Constitution. Some people have called it a flawed document, right? And of course, when people say this, there are different things that they mean because they might be referring to different sections of the Constitution. Chief Oguche, what aspects of the 1999 Constitution at this time do you think need urgent amendment? That if we do not change, there might be no change.
I like the way you phrase the question. But then it's not just looking at what aspects of the Constitution that require or entail urgent amendment. It's looking at the Constitution holistically to know whether it panders to our interests or it's something that can guide the state of affairs in terms of governance of this country and regulation of its people and its institutions in the next couple of decades ahead. I think the Constitution has outlived its usefulness, and that's no better way. There's no better way of putting it.
26 years?
Yes, it has outlived. We are looking at its content.
It's not that old.
And we are not looking at the age of the document. We are looking at the quality of its content, its provisions. It was a constitution that was fashioned towards a unitary system of government, in spite of the fact that it proclaims a federal system. If you look at it, they look at the legislative lists, for instance. It's not a legislative list that can be said to be quite comforting for any Nigerian at this age. When you upload all the legislative powers and give to the central system, the exclusive legislative list, even though they have a concurrent list, but the concurrency of that list is equally challengeable because being the federal government is literally stepping into the shoes of every other legislative power that the Houses of Assembly has to make. The National Assembly is literally taking over everything. And the president can come, in his audacity to remove an elected democratic government that is put in place, and in the guise of declaration of a state of emergency, and all that. So, how do you survive in that kind of system, particularly if you are coming from a multifarious political system as ours? With diverse interests, with diverse aspirations, with diverse historical and traditional context. You begin to look at it purely from the point of view of the need, the necessity to entrench a people's document. And you cannot do that by amending and re-amending and co-amending provisions of a system of an organic instrument or of a constitutional document that has outlived its usefulness.
So we need a new one.
That's the point.
How long does it take to draft a constitution on average?
It doesn't take nothing. It just takes the will of the people. But then the fears we have is that at each time you make such proposal, like the days of Nahoro, when it was, when they were busy canvassing for these issues, we should have taken care of some of these problems we are envisaging, we are experiencing now. Those in the National Assembly who are supposed to take the bull by the horns to that effect will begin to have fear of the unknown, because at the end of the day, it will uproot them from their seats and all that. Because, you cannot talk about making a new constitution with the people who are currently in parliament. It will be a misnomer of sorts. So, a lot of public interest issues come to be a very frustrating point for the emergence of a credible constitution. The constitution making process that's prescribed for any country as diverse as Nigeria's is the one that emanates from the people. It may not wholesomely represent their interests, but at least to a large extent, it will be something, a document, an instrument that they can draw inspirations from.
It'll be a reflection.
Governance will be dictated by the terms and conditions of that. Look at the Constitution today. To what extent will you say that its provisions are being respected and abided with?
Yeah, not a lot, obviously.
Not much. because we now have a constitutional order, which I think is a big misnomer. How to place it? Constitution, what we are talking about the inadequacy and the error and general provisions of the Constitution. So when we talk about constitution reform, where are they going from? They include amendment and that prime before the national, which has taken a lot of energy, dissipated energy on, is the issue of creation of states.
Yeah.
As though that is the prime issue, the prime problem that is confronting the country. I think it's just more of a circus and maybe a place for legislative playground than for serious business to be attached to it.
As always, it is.
So if you really want a constitutional reform, then we must tackle it from the frontal perspective in ensuring that we have a constitution that is agreeable to the people.
Okay, so let's talk about the one that people believe affects them directly, at least to the extent that they notice the changes, and that is the Electoral Act. Most of the complaints have come from these sectors: electronic transmission of results, Section 60, Sub 5, and 64, 4 to 6. These sections talk about recording and transmitting, but are ambiguous about real-time electronic transmission. INEC's operational independence. Of course, the appointment of the INEC chairman and all of that is still the prerogative of the president. Resolution of pre-election and post-election disputes. The process, the timeline, internal party democracy, and punishment for electoral offenses. These 5 segments, if tackled, will do serious change and upgrade to our elections. And I'm hoping that the Senate, because, in some way, shape, or form, the public has to set the agenda. While talking about the Electoral Act, would look at these 5 things I've just mentioned. Because if we do, it's also going to affect them, like you said. To affect a lot of them.
Somehow.
To a great degree.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
Okay, coming up next, I guess we'll be talking about the judiciary, where he is a player. What kind of reforms we need in that sector. But I'd like to hear from you now. And that means that to answer this question, you kind of have to have a certain degree of knowledge of our Constitution. What is something that you'd like to change in the Nigerian Constitution? If you were to recommend, and your recommendations will be factored, what is something that you would like to see changed in the Nigerian Constitution? 0817-923-0002, 0817-923-0003. WhatsApp is 080-903-06416. Please turn off your radio as you call. Hello.
Hello. Good evening.
Good evening. What's your name?
My name is from Good.
All right. Go ahead.
What I expect the modification in our constitution is, one, giving so much power and credence to the people. By what? Option A4.
Can you turn off your radio, please?
Let me reduce it. You okay now?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. So we should turn to
Option A4.
Option A4, what I will give INEC, Independent Electoral Commission, to conduct an election openly and declaring everybody. Count it one by one. Then again, Constitution should also give power of the creation of more state and local government areas to enable those areas who are congested to have more state and local government, and to empower strong institutions where the voices of even the common person should be heard in the society, not the strong men.
Okay.
That will be my summation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can tell my guests will respond to that shortly. Logoman from HA. Good evening.
Yeah, in this constitution, the basis of the president, because the president that have most that no have in this. So if there is one because me to put and also amend our electoral process, where your vote will be counted. It should be election, not with some 2023, where a vote said all of a sudden they said they cannot transmit. So for me, those are things I needed from National Assembly. If I thought they can do it, the 2027 Nigeria will have a better president.
All right. Thank you, Logoman. Tawo from Mbaraja. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. A quick one for me. They should take away the powers of the president as being the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. That should be taken away from him.
No, the president. No, the president has to. That to be important.
He should consecutively.
Okay.
He's using that against the people, so it should be taken away from him.
Okay.
It should completely be taken away from him. Do you know that the way it is now, we say we are practicing a democracy, but it's as if we are practicing a military, so to say. If not, why should the president declare a state of emergency in the state and bring in an ex-military person to rule the state? So it means that the military is a good governor that people should be practicing.
Okay.
The president should no longer be the
commander-in-chief of armed forces.
That's
all right.
what I take, my brother.
Thank you, Tawo. I'll take the call from Mark and get back to my guest. Oh, okay. We've lost that call. Chief Oguche, we have callers talk about the powers of the president. One person said that we should try option A4, open ballot in 2025. Can we pull that off in this day and age? Is that feasible?
Well, I think that's rather a call for us to tinker with ideas. Electoral reforms are very important, but we lost it when credible documents to that effect, the Justice Ways Commission reports on electoral reforms, which was very comprehensive. I refer to it in the past tense because it appears to have been buried. The National Assembly just looked at those aspects that will ensure that they continue to sit in their positions and threw the rest away. It talked elaborately about those 5 issues raised on the extent to which we can dismantle the powers of the electoral system, the INEC, in terms of creation of electoral constituency delimitation commission, creation of electoral offences commission, creation of regulation of political parties commission, different from INEC itself. It should have served a very good purpose in all these defections and all these relegations we are seeing within political structures in this country. That document would have been very primary in the consideration of what the future of this country in terms of electoral processes. Because if we get our electoral processes right, let us tell ourselves the truth. If the proper people, if the people of this country exercise their franchise, and that franchise is properly represented in the people they voted for, Nigeria would have gone beyond anybody's imagination. It's simply that at the end of the day, it is not the people that's voted for. In every community, they know. If you go to your community, for instance, or Arakonchi, they know who you are. How come it's the kind of characters that we see now that are leaders? So when you have a system that's fraught with irregularities, it makes governance very wobbly. It makes it very warped. It makes it very susceptible to all manner of insuperabilities that you cannot define. And that's the crux of the sin. The thing is that the last caller raised a very important issue, but he expressed it more out of fear than reality, because it is not the fault of the Constitution that the president could remove elected democratic leaders from a constituent part of the country. There's no provision of the Constitution empowering him to do that. But then somebody had qualified it very well that it has to do with the excessive powers that the president wields, which also calls that we should begin now to look at, for the sake of not ourselves, but for the sake of our children, for the sake of the future of this country, to revisit this presidential system that we have adopted from America. You can now see what Trump is doing with his own.
Yes, and that's not a good example.
Which gives a very good indication of what somebody who is very avaricious of power will do.
He had problems with, I can't remember the name of the guy the other time, about some chain of command.
He has problems everywhere with the judiciary. He even said that the court should not make orders against his executive powers, executive orders.
But does the president need to be the commander-in-chief of the armed forces? Does that need to happen for every country?
It is attached to his office. He should be the commander-in-chief. He should be the one to declare a state of war, declare a state of emergency. He should be the one to lead the guard, the National Guard. Okay. I mean, you cannot talk about separating it from one from the other. I think it raises certain some questions that will require a bit of research to know if there's any system that separates the office of the presidency from commandeering the armed forces. But we are looking at a process that will ensure the enthronement of credible elections, credible leadership, integrity in the process, sanctity in the ballot, and from there you can see every other thing would now begin to come in. It's not just looking for people that have the fear of God. Fear of God is even relative these days, but people who by their nature would abide by the Constitution and treat it with the sanctity that it deserves.
Okay. So we'll take a few messages, and remember, we've talked Constitution, we've talked Electoral Act. The judiciary is still waiting on the wings. And hopefully our guests will touch that as well. That guy should be arrested for treason. Who said the power of the commander of chief should be taken away from? Why is that the first message I'm seeing? Should be taken away from the president. I bet who go collect them from the president? Alex from Oguche says, Alex, thank you for sending that. I understand your concerns, but my guest has clarified that it needs to be attached to that office. Some of the changes I would expect, the voting system should be changed to electronic, the judiciary and Senate to be autonomous and not influenced by the president. The elected president should not have the right to remove an elected governor of any state.
At all.
INEC would be autonomous and not influenced by sitting president. Like my guest said, he doesn't have the right, but again, the excessive power makes Nigerians feel that he does, and that's why he still stands. Good afternoon. The electoral umpire is not independent and our votes do not count. This is a challenge, hence the reason why political leaders are not accountable to the people. Electronic voting and transmission of votes should be made compulsory through the units and serious punishment for electoral offenders. Best in Port Harcourt. We have just 5 minutes. Chief Oguche, you are a legal practitioner. What reforms are desperately needed in the judiciary?
Well, series of them. So many reforms, because we can see that our judicial system is threading wobbly. It's not what it used to be, even in the military days. We had a very robust system, even under military commands, where the judiciary has to maneuver through austere clauses, decrees, and all that to dispense justice. And justice was being dispensed at that time. It had the favorable respect of countries. That majority of the African countries, particularly those in the West African sub-region, were manned by Nigerian judges, Nigerian lawyers, and even in the West Indies, Uganda, Ethiopia, most of those countries, and they were seriously admired. But I think there's been some bit of interruption in that system that has affected it so unwholesomely to the extent that we begin to question the integrity of the process, of the judicial process, the judicial system itself, and the extent to which justice is upheld. But we find those things, particularly in areas concerning political cases and election petitions. In the ordinary course, I'm a lawyer. In the ordinary course of adjudication, land matters, chieftaincy matters, you see that the law is followed religiously and zealously. And how that's happened, I do not know. But I think it's a lot too much interference by the political elites.
Do you agree now when I say politics is political? And by design?
I would say this one has to do with politics because it has to do with the sacredness of the judicial institution. And that is one fact you must acknowledge. That in the military days, a military governor may not know who the chief judge of the state is. And it will be totally difficult for him to summon the chief judge of his state. In fact, in the days of Graham Douglas in Rivers State here, for instance, I understand we were told elaborately how he kept them at bay. Whoever is the military governor, you can't summon him. He upholds his integrity. He upholds his nobility. But these days, a local government chairman can just call all of them and they come running. I'm not trying to lampoon on their lordships, but then we have to call a spade, particularly the Supreme Court. Look at the kind of judgments and decisions they are churning out. And when you criticize them, they take offense because they felt they should not be. But then if you do not want the heat, don't come to the kitchen. Get out from the kitchen. Particularly in election petitions. People who do not win elections are enthroned as leaders forcefully. How do you expect that level of confidence that should exist, that level of respect and loyalty that should exist between the people and the judiciary to continue? So that's where we have the problem. it has been since 2015. I think it has been taken to a much higher notch, to the extent that you begin to question a lot of things about the working of the judicial system, a system that's so revered and so treated with so much sanctity. And I would be very, very correct to say that in that area, majority of the problems we have had in this country, in terms of leadership qualities, in terms of aspirational values, they all fall squarely on judicial failure.
All right, Chief Oguche, we are out of time. This is based on a promise that the Senate will do this in the second half of the 10th Assembly. Now, I'm asking for your opinion. Do you think they'll pull this off, considering how it might affect them?
We saw what happened in the build-up to the 2007 elections. A lot of proposals were made, a lot of laws were passed, and there was this ding-dong affair between the presidency and the National Assembly over the passing of the bill, until Buhari now says it's too late for us to do that. So is anybody talking about electoral reforms now? They are more interested in getting defections from one side to the other. You know, nobody's talking about, but that is a prime issue that will keep this democracy strong, and not only keeping the democracy strong, it's only the prime issue, the prime factor that will keep this country moving. Because the system we find ourselves now is totally and completely unacceptable.
Indeed. Well, thank you, Chief Oguche. It's always wonderful doing this with you. We appreciate it. And hopefully when issues of pressing national nature present themselves, we'll have these conversations again. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Oracle. Grateful.
All right, this is where we wrap up this conversation. The news update comes up at 5. After that, another northern state has offered a peace deal to bandits, believe it or not. And this is as Benue grapples with killings. We have that conversation in the next hour. Stay with us.